Hare Krishna, everybody. Welcome to this session. It's that time of year again, and the Vaishnavi ministry are also been taking part in it for a couple of years now. It's 16 days for nonviolence against women, which is becoming more and more something that we're all aware of, which is a good first step. And these 16 days are to kind of, I guess, help us in our communities to consider this from different perspectives. We've been asked to speak about a particular element, which is assessing community well-being and thinking about how we can do that better. The theme for the 16 days this year is for ISKCON is the third of Srila Prabhupada's 7 purposes of ISKCON, which is to bring the members of the society together with each other and closer to Krishna, and thus to develop the idea within the members and humanity at large that each soul is a part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So I wanted to welcome Uttama Devi Dasi and Partha Das, who are in British Columbia in Canada. Welcome to you both. I'm Ravenel Chambers. Ravi, I'm in the UK. So we had a little brief chat just before we started. So how would you like to kind of frame it for us in terms of how we start this conversation? Over to you.
Well, in terms of the well-being of a community, I guess we could start discussing, what is a healthy community? And I would say a healthy community is one that's filled with love, respect, kindness, and compassion. And as Vaishnavas, that we understand those are extremely important Vaishnava values that we're aspiring to live and practice. And as a part of coming to a state of healthy community, I think it's also important to have the vision of what the healthy community is. And, we have health and we have illness. So to stay healthy, you need to understand a little bit about illnesses so you can stay healthy. And I think that's true in communities. We have to know what the healthy values we're aspiring for and what are things that can compromise that, be detrimental to that state of community, and be aware of those things. I think that's very important because it's described in the Upanishad that one who understands knowledge and the essence side by side can attain the full blessings of immortality. So it's important we understand that so we can move towards the healthy state as much as we can and avoid those pitfalls or the weeds around the devotional creeper. And I think it's a very strong need for that because often as aspiring Vaishnavas, we behave one way in the temple or, in association. And then sometimes in our own little world, we go home and close the door and we might start to act like a totally different kind of creature. And so sometimes there can be a disconnect there. So it's important to understand the health and unhealth and how we can come to that state of healthy community and healthy beings and within our communities.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think maybe we'll come on to it later. I think it's really good what you're saying because sometimes I was just looking on a devotee forum the other day. What someone commented that as they came up through Krishna consciousness, and they were been in Krishna consciousness for quite a long time, there were certain things that they felt, they saw, and they heard, even not just necessarily behind the closed doors part, but even sometimes within the apparent way that Krishna consciousness was explained to them, or that there were things that they thought, this is strange, doesn't seem right, but they didn't. And maybe at that time, they sort of were either told that they shouldn't be challenging or whatever, the different things, and they sort of went along with it. But now they're sort of realizing that actually, no, what I thought I saw, it looked like a pineapple, and it was a pineapple. So it's kind of like you said there. If the more we understand these dysfunctional things, then when we see them, we can go, oh, that doesn't, that's not healthy,
Mhm.
if you like.
Yeah.
One of the difficulties that I see with people even recognizing the dysfunction is we all haven't had an upbringing that was highly functional.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we don't recognize dysfunction,
Mm.
and sometimes we don't have a model for healthy functioning. And so consequently, we can bring that into our devotional service and sometimes even read it in between the lines in the scripture because that's
Mhm.
just our experience.
Mm.
So the more I think that we can kindly call out each other on these things and question them and, just perhaps offer something a little more well functioning would be good.
Yeah.
And I also think that when we see people not treated well, even if we can't somehow speak to maybe the people who were not behaving properly, at least we can go and give some shelter to the person who was offended, and give some support there. Because at least that's some help. Because sometimes you can't immediately change the bigger picture.
Mm.
But if we start kind of by supporting those that have been hurt, and then people will start to see what is healthy functioning and it can work its way up.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I heard a thing recently about, it was talking about relationships and how when we are, let's say, I don't know what the language, it might not be the right language, but let's say when we're wounded or we're not operating at a sort of a healed level of self, then we often will attract other people at that level. And it's only when we start to heal more and become, maybe less wounded that we then, like, you almost attract someone at the same level as you, if you know what I mean. Um,
Mhm.
and so, like you say, sometimes people have grown up, and if their life was kind of chaotic, or the way in which love was shown or expressed was a bit dysfunctional or a bit chaotic, then we think that that's kind of how you show love, and that's how it is. And so, yeah, we don't always know any better than that until maybe we.
That's called conditioned life.
We
Yeah.
bring.
Yeah.
So part of what I see that makes a healthy community is healthy individuals. And so it does start with ourselves.
Yeah.
We can complain all we want that the community is not healthy. How are we dealing with others? And that's where we can make the change.
Mm.
Because what we, the behaviors that we exhibit come back to us. It's like if we somehow make the air toxic, we're breathing that same air. So when we don't speak nicely, it's going to come back to us. We're in that same biosphere.
Mm.
And I don't think we realize that enough.
Mm.
Our own responsibility.
Yeah. What are your thoughts? So certainly we can take responsibility for our own actions and dealings and everything else. But let's say wherever we are in the community is not necessarily someone in of influence potentially, and so this happens in all aspects of society. But there's a sort of a, we'll call yeah, yeah,
We all have our own unique conditionings that
call it culture, because it is kind of the culture of the temple or the community or whatever it is a certain way. And if the culture supports a certain type of, or has become accustomed to a certain type of behaviors or things, then it's very difficult, even if we ourselves feel like it's not right. The culture, meaning the many, can often feel more powerful than us as an individual.
Mhm.
And equally, if mixed into that, the leaders or whoever has kind of set the tone or the culture have used philosophy, and not just philosophy, but an absolute philosophy, it can sometimes feel extremely difficult to challenge it, because often the way in which we hear anecdotally is that if you say something, it's like, listen to your authorities, you're just being on the mental platform, whatever, like so many different ways that they can sort of make people feel like it's their fault, like they need to just be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think if we are going to talk about a little bit of dysfunctionalism, like that's something maybe perhaps unique to some extent to our communities, because not every community has a kind of an absolute way they can just quote something to knock someone down straight away. So what
Mm-hmm.
are your thoughts on how to tackle that?
Like you were saying, that we may be in such a society and not feel like we have that influence.
Mm.
I think at the same time, I think we all have some influence, however small it may be.
Mm.
And that was kind of how our little group, the Grass Division team, started. We kind of were pushing against a tide of a lot of negative paradigms about affection and the Grahast ashram, and what we saw was, okay, we're just going to try and make a difference, even if it's just dealing with one couple at a time. And you're probably familiar with Stephen Covey's
Yeah.
some of his principles, and one was to work in your sphere of influence.
Yeah.
And it's definitely true from my practical experience that when you work in your sphere of influence, it gradually expands. You meet the people you need to meet. You hear the things you exactly need to hear. Things start to happen in a very spiritual, dynamic way.
Mm.
And if you get too much out of your sphere of influence and worry about the things that you can't change, you might be concerned, but maybe you don't have the influence. If you're too much absorbed in those things, it almost becomes disempowering because you just feel totally helpless. And I think we all, as individuals, can do something. It was just like Krunamai, is it? I think at the bottom of her email, she puts Kruna Shakti. You have to become the change you want to see.
Yeah.
And so, like Uttam was saying, the communities, we all have to do that, see how we can be better and improve ourselves and help others around us improve, and find Sangha with like-minded people who want to make those kind of improvements. And even though sometimes it may seem overwhelming to try and stop the tide, we might not be able to stop the tide, but we can make a difference. And I think it's important that we not lose sight of that and do our best.
I would also like to speak to the other end about changing the culture.
Mm.
So I see that in some places the culture is very authoritarian, in other places it isn't. It just seems to be, the leaders' way in which their style is. And we see that Prabhupada's style wasn't really very authoritarian. He more had a creative style. Go out and start a temple. Here's a few little tidbits. Just go for it. Figure out how to do it in your own way and style.
Mm.
We are, though, living in the material world, which runs on the premise that I would like to be the controller and the enjoyer, and that's how we come here. So we also live in a culture that broadly is very patriarchal in a negative sense of the term, in that just like Varnashram is very much recommended where everyone has their place and their purpose, but it got corrupted into the casteism where I'm better than you and you're down and I'm up. So in the material world, patriarchy, the definition is one segment of society has all the power and the others have none. So that's how the material world functions in its worst. And we see that the 16 days of activism started by the UN because in some cultures, some countries, some religious organizations is very much suppression and power and not used to a good advantage. So it's very interesting. I did a Veda-based search one time, and Prabhupada almost never used the word patriarchy because he actually had a better sometimes grasp on the English language than we did. Because Vaishnavism, yes, we want people in position and men to take responsibility, be innovative, be protective, be leaders. When Prabhupada would use an adjective for men, he would often use responsible. So he encouraged the responsibility and the protection and the leadership, but not in the corrupt sense where one person has all the power and others have none. And so we see that it's so easy in the material world to gravitate towards that because that's the flow of the material world. But we need to imbibe Vaishnava principles, that we're all Samadarshina, we're all equal, and we have equal rights and equal humanity, and operate on that principle. What to speak of the Vaishnava humility that, not only we're equal, but, I'm nothing compared to you because, Krishna's the controller.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I mean, Partha, when you started and you mentioned the principles of kindness, compassion, all of these qualities that we would all, that anyone really should try to develop. As devotees, we certainly if we were using these types of qualities to measure a healthy society, then isn't it kind of incredible that somehow in the history of our society, so many things that if that was our measurement, we put them side by side with that, didn't match up to it, still kind of got a pass, not only got a pass, but kind of were at certain times, at least, sometimes by certain people at the time considered to be even divine behaviors and whatever. So how can we get so far removed from something which is such a simple, beautiful kind of litmus test? How does it happen that we can drift so far, even in a society that is trying, broadly to
promote the opposite?
Right. Yeah. Because those kind of behaviors where there's extreme controlling and manipulation and undermining people's integrity and sense of self-worth, what to speak of things like, emotional and physical abuse or sexual abuse and marital abuse.
Yeah.
Those things are the antithesis of Vaishnavism. I remember growing up in, I remember the first time I heard in the news something about domestic violence. And I thought, well, how can someone, beat or murder their wife? It just, so you hear a few of those things come up sometimes. How can that go on? And I remember thinking, is it some kind of disease or something? I remember we had a cat when I was a kid, and the cat started exhibiting incredibly aggressive behavior. It was unbelievable. And long story short, the cat, they gave it an autopsy, and there was a worm in its brain that was triggering these spastic seizures and extreme anger. And so I thought, well, maybe is that what's happening with people who lose touch with their values and commit what's violence, like in domestic violence. And
you thought they must have a worm in their head?
A few years ago, I came across this a very interesting book by an author, Dr. Stephen Stosny, who actually spent his life trying to understand why people fail at compassion, especially in the realm of domestic abuse. And it's quite interesting. And what he found in his study was that everyone, even he was interviewing people in prison who were murderers, and they all had a value. They wanted to be a better person, a loving husband, contribute to society. But somehow in their life, they became completely removed from the things they valued. And they would act in these ways completely contrary to what they valued. So he was trying to understand, why is that? And some of the conclusions of his research were that he was describing how all of us, our sense of self-worth comes to a great degree from how we perceive those we value and care about, how they view us, how we perceive that. And I was thinking about that once. Just like, we've all probably been in Harinam sometime and chanting on the streets, and someone says, "Oh, you stupid Hare Krishnas," and it doesn't really affect you. But if someone really close friend or your wife said, "You're a stupid idiot," that's going to hurt. That's going to hurt if someone you value gives you some really negative statement.
Yeah.
So we all experience that. Some individuals who've grown up in very abusive homes where they've been ridiculed and maybe physically punished very severely or sexually abused, their sense of self-worth becomes very much eroded and undermined, and they develop psychological scars, very deep psychological scars. And generally, what they've perceived from their adult caregivers were, a lot of yelling and screaming and violence and put downs. And so they grew up with these kind of scars. And later on in their adult life, they might have forgotten about those scars. They enter into intimate relationship
Or community.
or community relationships, and then they find one day someone says something maybe a little negative towards them,
And it
it just it just brings back all those memories, the visceral feelings they felt as a child. And a lot of those people will tend to respond the way they saw the adult caregiver respond, with anger or violence and just incredible rage. And what that does, that rage produces adrenaline, and adrenaline numbs pain. It's actually a numbs pain. So that feeling of inadequacy, which is being amplified by that situation, when they become angry,
gives you a sense of power.
Gives them a sense of power, and they literally become addicted to that. And therefore, that's why domestic violence is usually cyclical.
Yeah.
There's an outbreak of violence, then there's remorse, and bring the wife flowers, I'll never do this again, blah, blah, blah. And then it's triggered again, and it's a cycle. So somehow they've completely lost touch with their values, and that could happen to greater or lesser degrees, on the spectrum throughout society, how people respond to those kind of trauma triggers. And I think it's one positive, I think, in our society. There is now developing a trauma awareness in society that it is a serious anarta that many of us may have. And I think also it's very fortunate now that we have a lot of Vaishnavas and Vaishnavis who are studying psychology, becoming counselors, and are able to help people process those kind of things. And it's very interesting. I came across a quote once where Srila Prabhupada, he was talking about how different sciences can be used in Krishna's service. And he mentioned psychology. And he said when they are utilized solely and wholly in the service of the Lord, he said they factually become Hari Kirtan. So utilizing those, if you want to say, psychological tools to kind of help those wounds be healed, that's a part of your very important part of your spiritual life.
Yeah.
And I think the more individually if we can realize that, and especially for those of us who may have some positions of leadership, it's really important that we have to see, do we have those kind of anartas that are manifesting in some way, in our leadership roles that maybe are not really related to healthy Vaishnava behavior. And it's a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge our society faces to reckon that.
I think, you'll have seen it for a longer period of time, but in my time, I think a major step forward in that regard is like acknowledging that things like, therapy or psychotherapy or personal development or whatever they are not, I know there would have certainly been a time, and maybe still in certain places, where you would say it's all just complete nonsense, total distraction, completely useless, just chant Hare Krishna, all of that. And so in many ways, it's a sort of an irony in a way that maybe the intention, let's just say, even if it was good, to kind of be pure and kind of just really stick to the process, almost became the problem by not, by,
Yeah.
by,
Yeah.
by not kind of by that
Mhm.
fanaticism in a way meant that it cut us off from things that, so that's a real irony, isn't it? Imagine like a sort of a sincere effort to kind of try and do things in a really like aim so high that actually
Mhm.
imagine the tragedy in a way if in the process of trying to do that we ignored these other things that could have helped us, and not only did we not reach so high, we actually went so low,
Yes. Yes.
like more low than maybe we would have ever gone otherwise.
Yeah, because if
Mhm.
you have the highest thing and you flip it, it becomes the lowest. That's what Dr. Truth Bar said. It becomes
Yeah,
worse.
and that's
Yeah.
such tragedy, isn't
That's
it? I mean, it's like it's and also if you think about trauma, like you're talking about on a personal level, but then you think of trauma on an organizational level. If you are trying to be a good person and you mess up, you're going to feel a bit bad. If you're trying to be like a completely, like the loftiness of what we aim for, like this, we want to have pure love of God, become completely pure, and then we do something terrible. The shame, the depth of that shame, and that kind of that the mismatch, the distance between the two, and then if that's happening collectively, as well,
Mhm.
it's
Mhm.
hard, isn't it? It's quite destructive.
It is very destructive. Although I suppose the upside is it kind of gets under the magnifying glass and we see it, and so now we're dealing with it a bit more.
Yeah,
So that's the upside of it, and we take it from that.
100%.
I also see that we actually truly need to make tangible, factual spiritual advancement so that we understand what are the symptoms of a person who's speaking from their higher self and what are the symptoms of a person who's speaking from their conditioned, triggered self.
Yeah.
Because, Bhagavad Gita says we have to overcome the higher self, the lower self with a higher self. So we have to actually put into practice our spiritual realizations where we can, take a breath, not just respond to someone else's dysfunction,
Mhm.
to recognize which voice a person's speaking from. Like if a person is speaking from their conditioned self, we need to have enough spiritual awareness to recognize that.
Mm.
Like when I do couples counseling, we say, look, it's your two conditioned selves are speaking to each other. Can you take a breath, get in your higher selves and start this conversation over again? Because it's not going anywhere pretty.
Yeah.
So we have to be able to recognize it before we can change it also.
Yeah.
So part of it is education. And part of that education is really taking up and actually practicing our Krishna consciousness
Mm.
so that we can stay in our higher spiritual selves and see everything with the proper vision.
Mm.
So part of improving communities, I feel, is to make sure we have the vision to have, healthy interactions with people and spiritual training on a very day-to-day applicable level. Because I see a lot of communities, there's so much almost strangled by the amount of expansion they're trying to do that nobody's focusing on their spiritual advancement and what we all came here for.
Yeah.
And spiritual advancement we get by associating with others who are spiritually advanced. So we come to community to pick up on the good qualities of others and in that way purify ourselves of our conditioning.
Mm.
So we need to make the atmosphere, loving and kind and supportive. And that's really how we're going to advance to attain our higher selves so we
Mhm.
can really practice Krishna consciousness.
It's like the first statement of purpose of Srila Prabhupada's was through a systematic process of education. He wanted to correct the imbalance of values in society
Mm.
to create kind of a tranquil atmosphere so we could progress in spiritual life.
Mm.
And achieve the
And
third principle
yeah,
that you were
yeah,
bringing up.
and so
Mm.
that really is really important for us to educate devotees in those principles and to help them realize that your relationships, whether it's with your spouse, your community, going out in the world, that's the practicum. That's the practicum. of applying the philosophy. And sometimes we might have Bhakti Shastri, Bhakti Vaibhava, and we don't know how to apply it in when push comes to shove in our daily lives. That's a shortcut. We have to learn how to do that.
Some really interesting points you bring up there, because so some of the things that are coming up from me, and then maybe you can reflect. Of course, Bhakti Shastri. I did Bhakti Shastri many years ago and enjoyed it. And there's those types of things, and they are they're great. You can learn and stuff. But like you say, it's sort of like they say, where the rubber meets the road. Like it's all well and good to learn all that stuff, but like it's on day-to-day basis. Like how you are you able to be within a peer group, or have someone guiding you as to how to apply it and stuff. And so maybe one of the things that comes to mind is like maybe smaller, more local mentors, or rather than,
For sure.
like, so in other words, gurus, or whatever we want to call them, that are just looking after a much smaller number of people. But also the idea of expansion, because it's you couldn't really call it an anartha because of the history of the movement, but equally in a way you could. Like, we've been often told that, like, or I've heard, and we've probably all heard, like, you're not in control. There's no way you can kind of purify yourself. You have to be just completely up to the mercy of Lord Chaitanya. The best way to do that is just to try and spread this movement, expand, and in that process, everything will work itself out. And I guess there is certainly a truth in when you're trying to help other people. It also does help you, but equally, I think we sacrifice. We're like moths going into a fire sometimes, or I think we can sacrifice. We can become martyrs in that endeavor, where we actually aren't looking after ourselves, or we're not doing the work to care for ourselves, and then a lot of things can get passed off. Well, I know, a lot of, let's say, not great behavior can get sort of given a pass because of the lofty endeavor. So I think those are a few things that came to mind. I don't know if you want to share any thoughts on that.
Well, I see that Srila Prabhupada saw the same dilemma, and that's why at one point he says, we've expanded enough, it's time to boil the milk.
Yeah.
So it's not that we stop, bringing other people to Krishna consciousness, but we do need to focus on boiling the milk and having really good interactions and practical applications of the philosophy.
And in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is bringing Arjuna to the point of surrender, and Krishna says, just surrender unto me. And then Krishna says, I've explained everything to you, Arjuna. Now deliberate on this fully and do as you wish to do. And it's interesting in that purport, Prabhupada said, this is the best way to surrender. You think about things as thoroughly as you can, and then decide. That you have to actually think through it and then make the decision.
To do what?
To surrender or not surrender.
Yeah. Yeah. Another thing I'd love to hear your thoughts on. So sometimes we hear the story of Yudhisthira was considered not to be surrendered because he was interested in morality or the truth or these kind of ideas. And really, if you're really surrendered, if you're really kind of, then you won't care anything about morality or truthfulness or anything. You're sort of transcendental to that, and that's sort of like a true surrender. So again, that's a super lofty idea, but how do we?
No, I think it's wrong thinking.
Well,
I don't even think it's
to us
true.
like that, though, right?
It's like we are supposed to have morality, but we don't let that morality catch us to stay in that mode of goodness, so we don't get that little bit higher. But it's not that you don't have morality. We're going to throw out all the morality and think you're going to go higher. Come on. It doesn't work like that. We threw the baby out with the bathwater.
But isn't it presented that the specific disqualification that Yudhisthira has is because he's interested in morality?
I don't know if it's disqualification. He just hesitated for a moment. Just a moment's hesitation.
Yeah.
If you want to, because you don't want to get stuck there on mundane morality.
But then
However,
surely, if for example, no, I hear you, but like, let's say if we're going to say that, then why not just go straight past it? What's, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, if there's
but
something
to
higher
go
than it.
past it, you got to go through it.
Mm,
There's this really nice lecture where Prabhupada said, Lord Chaitanya, he gave up everything at 24. His beautiful wife is this and that. He says, but he is God and he's completely pure. For the rest of us, we have to systematically perform all of our duties and get the purification.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like you're dreaming you're up that high
yeah. That's what I
and you
mean.
don't need it.
It's such a it's a problem we don't really need to worry about too much at this stage.
There was a point in our society where there was a group of individuals, especially one, who really wanted to centralize all the control in ISKCON. And Prabhupada stopped that, and he wrote one letter, and he said, it should not be that one person has all the control and you have to beg to him for your maintenance. And Prabhupada, I remember he wrote, I want all of the devotees to be independently thoughtful in all fields of knowledge and action, and that's important,
Yeah,
because that's how we have that check that things don't go off the deep end by surrendering to the wrong things or the wrong attitudes.
mm,
He probably said that he wanted all of us to read all of his books and know his books. And
mm.
that's so important.
It's interesting too, though, because it brings the point that, like, when we, at least my line of thought is, when we think of this idea that when I surrender, like, as if that's like a fixed point, but actually, in the spirit of what you just said,
It's ongoing.
it's at every moment. Like, if we can call it Krishna consciousness, but let's just say, consciousness in its inherent natural form, or even connection with God, it's a moment to moment living thing.
Yes.
And in that case, then it's not, whereas I feel like, at least in my own experience, I don't know if anyone else feels this, there was a sense in my mind that, like, I'd found something, I get my head around, like, all of the things, and now I have a fixed idea. Like, because we have an answer, sometimes the way in which we engage with the philosophy is like, we ask questions, we get answers, and it's like, okay, there's an answer for everything, and now we know. But actually, I think for me, that's actually that's a wall. You've got to get
Yeah.
past that, because otherwise
Yeah.
you're stuck, like, in that kind of
Yeah.
fixed idea. And it's fascinating. Our younger son, we've been through a journey with him more recently where he has elements of, like, autism and ADHD and these different things. So we've also been kind of learning all about it. And I think there may be some elements of ADHD that I have. But as we learn more about autism, it's a very literal way, like the brain. And I wonder, I don't know how, if it would be possible, but I was just thinking it would be amazing to do a study of where there may be crossover between neurodiverse people and people who become devotees, because an autistic person takes something very literally, like, very
Mm.
literally. And I think there's a lot of people in our movement, I think, who sort of have they've got the answer, they've read the thing, and they're just stuck on that. Like, it's a very literal way of seeing it, and there's no room for any, like, sort of perspective, or, like, say, independently thoughtful ways of considering it, or even hopefully understanding it more deeply and more deeply and more deeply again, which would mean you'd see it in new ways. It's kind of very much like, what's the answer for that? This is the answer for that. That's it. You know, and
Very good. Yeah.
fascinating, I think. Yeah,
And
It borders on fundamentalism.
yeah, it does. But the person who's
my
fundamental is so convinced, like, it's so clear to them that, like, it's as clear as
mm,
day. They can't understand why anyone could see it in a different way, right?
But that's a Kanishta level. You have to,
yeah.
Also, surrender isn't something that's forced. We think of surrender as, the gun to your head. But surrender is actually something of your heart.
Mm.
When you see something wonderful, it's a calling, that we can fully surrender. So we should do that surrender lovingly with full understanding and appreciation. And, that we've developed the appreciation that we want to do these things.
Mm.
I mean, yes, okay, bow down even though you don't feel like it. I get that. You start there. But we're just talking, we can't just keep saying surrender, surrender. People actually have to develop some depth of love in their heart
Mm.
to actually surrender. Otherwise, it's just your body going through the motions.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. It's interesting. I remember one time, I don't know, it would have been in the 90s sometime. I was spent a couple of times. I spent a bit of time at the Chowpatty Temple, and they have the morning program, and then they have a brahmachari class around sort of 10 till half 11 or something like that. And one of the twins, I don't know which one, Pankaj Jangri or Janani Vas, were there, and so all the boys were asking different questions. Even Radhanath Swami was in the room, and they were trying to get some clarifications on deity worship, and they were saying, so, is it exactly like, do you do it like this? Like, how many times do you so to this and that? And they just kept saying, doesn't matter. And then they were going, no, but you got to tell us, like, is it exactly like, we need to know if it's this many turns or that many turns? And they were like, yeah, it doesn't matter. And they kept saying, and they just weren't satisfied because, so of course there's guidance, and I'm sure there's, there's books and there's all that stuff. But it was just interesting because, like, we have such rigid rules in one way, or such clear, let's say, guidance or
Yeah.
rules,
Which is
which is
that's the proper term, clear and not rigid.
yeah, sure.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually. But it seems like if it's, and again, maybe this is again in the minds of people how they're reading it. It's kind of like a lot of people. It's like it's black and white. Well, if it says that, it's not 4, it's 5, or whatever it is. Yet
Because we're trying to do it with our heads instead of our hearts.
yeah.
Like
I think that's what they were trying to get across. Like it's yeah.
The Yagnik Brahmins, they didn't want to give any food to the cowherd boys, but their wives, they heard about Krishna and they had developed an attraction and love for Krishna immediately. Boom, they just went to
Yeah.
And the Brahmins are to hell with our Vedic studies.
Yeah.
Didn't get us anywhere.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting, isn't it? Like, because as new people, naturally you want to learn the ropes and you want to learn everything and do it correctly and stuff. But I wonder, why is it then that newer people are not, maybe they're not getting this guidance, like from the older people, that, like, of course there's this guidance and there's these rules, but actually there's something more. Do you know what I mean? Like, why do people tend to get stuck in that first bit?
I think it's part of the process. And it's also true what you say, they don't have the vision from more mature individuals, how to broaden that. I do think it's a natural progression because I was in Mayapur the first year that Russia got opened up enough to come, and all the Russians were on stage in Mayapur, and they were all, and I thought, oh my gosh, they don't even have any people over there to learn these malfunctions from. It's the way the Kanishta mind reads it in the books, and you come up with the same conclusions. It's got to be a stage you go through.
Yeah.
Because you want to, like, do it right.
Yeah.
And it's so different from everything else. So you tend to follow the rules. It's like anything, you follow the rules at first, and then you figure out how to break them and expand it into something better. Anything you do, right? So I think it's, on one hand, it's a natural process, but it would go a heck of a lot quicker if you had more people to be able to guide you from a mature platform.
That's what I was thinking too, because, like, it's all well and good that you figure it out by the school of hard knocks along the way, but what, like you say, if people could save you some of that trouble by guiding you a bit more earlier, right?
Even Jayadvaita Maharaj, once he said, this movement needs more grandparents.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the reasons Krishna consciousness took off in the West, because we were able to break our family connections and just engage completely in Prabhupada's movement. But at the same time, that was problematic because we didn't have a mature elder generation to help give us that kind of guidance. And we made a lot of mistakes.
Yeah.
But we really do need the older devotees to kind of
speak up and listen to us old folks.
Yeah. To mentor kindly.
There's also the interesting dynamic, isn't there, that sometimes the young person looks at, well, this is across all of society. They don't always, what do they say? Life is wasted on the young. It's like when you're young, you don't really know that you need guidance sometimes, or you don't, maybe you kind of want to make your own.
Yeah, find yourself.
Yeah. But equally, if we see people, if we're young and idealistic, and we see people who are maybe more mature and maybe less intense about everything, sometimes we can think, oh yeah, they've just become jaded, they don't really understand this. We're the ones, they sort of, and I think I probably was guilty of that myself. It's like, the people who may not be doing it as intensely or as kind of in the same way that you are, you just feel like, they just didn't make it, or somehow they faded away in some ways. So again, though, that is probably, even if that's the way I would see it on my own, if I had someone maybe guiding me, then I would be able to appreciate all of the different devotees at the different stages they're at, for maybe for different reasons. I might want to go to a certain devotee to be fired up and go out and travel to another country and do something or whatever. But especially if I'm going into family life, then I really need, people really need people to guide.
Different type of guidance. Yeah. Yeah. So we all pick our mentors according to what we need to learn. We're not all expert across the board.
Yeah.
And, I find personally encouraged when younger people do want to learn something from me, and it brings out the best in me. And it's nice to be able to offer back. So, yes, we should, go out there and offer, but we don't offer if we're not asked also, right? Because we kind of learned that also.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. But equally, if you don't offer, not that you necessarily offer, but in other words, if people only choose from, it's like, for example, if there's no healthy stuff to buy in the shop, then people will buy something unhealthy because it's on the shelf and the other thing's not on the shelf. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
So I think we need to broaden the range of stuff that gets stocked in the shop.
Yeah. Which brings up a topic that something I push for. We need a lot of the mature Vaishnavis to come out of their shells and start giving classes.
They really have so many nice things to say,
Definitely. And a female perspective, like the not just because they're, well, probably because they're men, but like there's been a very strong male kind of presentation and perspective on everything. And to presume, so I do a lot of work in my film work with around gender lens investing, and some of the stuff that they talk about is like, in the world of international development and in the world of investment, why would all the best ideas come from just one small segment of society, as in, mostly white men? It just doesn't make sense that they only would have a monopoly on all good ideas. And so, we talk about diversity and all these things, and of course it's diversity of, certain categories, like whether it's gender or ethnicity or whatever. But the whole point is diversity means there has to be different perspectives, like perspectives that look at things from different perspectives. And that's the richness. That's the value, actually. It's not, we can sometimes fall into that. It should be like a tokenistic thing, just have one of everyone just to make everyone happy. But actually there's great value in bringing different perspectives.
Exactly. We have two eyes. We can see perspective with two eyes. If we just have one eye, monocular, you can't really judge perspective.
Yeah.
So that's such a valuable lesson in life, that we should take those different perspectives.
And this whole topic is about community well-being, and it's pretty well known that us women are more socially adept. So why are you calling on us?
Yeah.
Not the gender stereotype.
Yeah. But isn't it fascinating that it's true? And for example, even in places like Bangladesh, there was a very famous thing called Grameen Bank. Muhammad Yunus, Professor Muhammad Yunus, I think he won whatever that peace prize is, UN Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize, for microfinance. So he would lend tiny amounts of money to women specifically, and they would, do little businesses and, essentially kind of make sure their family were okay. And they would always pay the money back. Whereas the men would, spend it or drink it or whatever. And, it was like
Try some grandiose scheme that flopped.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so, but there's an interesting thing that I have a bit of a theory. So like, if you, sometimes we think of what we may believe or we may feel has been presented to us as a very ideal society where women kind of stay indoors, they don't really speak, they don't get educated, they just kind of are humble and submissive and make sure that everything is nicely looked after for us. And so in that kind of a culture, I mean, I'll be honest, I think when I was young and when I started to look to get married, like I think I kind of like was looking for someone like that because I felt like that would be like, that would be like a good wife, I suppose. And then there's elements of that which which can be good. But I think in that mindset, then you can think that when you hear things like a woman is less intelligent, she's not that capable, she can't do this, she can't do that. Well, if you were to think that if all women were like that, then you would think that's probably true because they don't say anything, they don't ever go out, they don't do it, they just stay in. So it's almost like creating a very one-dimensional idea of what women can and even worse should be. And then it's kind of like, well, when I did my documentary, it was kind of like, if a girl would speak up, especially if she'd never been educated, it would be kind of like, there's no way that anything you could say would have any worth. Like, how the hell could you know anything? You know what I mean? So unfortunately, I think some of that, in whatever way it's come in, is there in our devotee mindset. And so I think that needs to change too, to really understand that there's so much that the women can offer.
I also think it's gender stereotyped, materialistic, patriarchal vision reading the Stropsters and coming up with that conclusion.
Yeah.
I mean, you read some of the descriptions of some of the gopis. Some of them were Vedic scholars. They were so well educated in so many facets of life. Just because they didn't go to some classroom to learn it,
Yeah,
it doesn't mean that they didn't know a lot of things, didn't have a wide scope of abilities, knowledge, learning. Sometimes I wonder, like, what are we reading? We don't read between the lines what's going on. We have no idea the social interactions.
Well, it's interesting, like there, because see, it's what gets emphasized. So I remember, like nowadays, I sometimes go on podcasts and things, and they always ask me, like, "Oh, how come? Why did you stop being a monk?" And I realized, like, it's in the books. It's all the way, like, it's right there that like there's the 4 ashrams, and at 25, practically, it was almost like a natural rite of passage, even though you'd been like, I know it's become popular. I just say this, it's quite funny. It's become popular now that some people who are brahmacharis, they call themselves monks. But sometimes I've now started to call it like we're student monks, because actually, it sounds better to call yourself a monk. But actually, like, in the ashram, in the varnashram idea, like when you're a brahmachari, you're a student, really. Like, and then mostly you would progress on to grihastha ashram, and I guess
I heard your word progress, not fall down.
Yeah, well, exactly. Like, it would be a
Good one.
natural, like it's the, like, in other words, it's the norm rather than the exception, right?
Right.
To go there, and then the very rare few who just were so naturally situated in that kind of like thinking and life would stay on. But the point being that because someone like me at 2021 went into the Brahmacharya ashram, even though in the books it says at 25, most people would happen, I don't even see or hear that. I mean, like, I'm blind to that, because my sort of momentum, my youthful idealistic momentum, or whatever it is just thinking, no, I see someone senior to me who's like decided to do that for their whole life, and I want to be like that. I'm going to do that. So, like you say, in the books, even though there are loads of other places where it says there are loads of other things, the mind is always doing this in any, it's filtering. It can't sort of take all of it in. So it just filters
Yeah.
and it focuses in on certain parts, either that it's interested in or that is being emphasized. So if every class tells you like a certain way of thinking about women, whether it says 100 other good things about them doesn't matter, because this is what is being emphasized over and over and over. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's the second verse of the Bhagavatam is an important point there that I think we really miss. It's described that the knowledge of the Bhagavatam, it's reality distinguished from illusion for the welfare of all. And how that's going to manifest is going to be different for different individuals. And therefore, you see so many different instructions. And I mean, I've always been fascinated by the contradictions, apparent contradictions in Prabhupada's books. And like one place he says, after 50, every man should take sannyas. Another place he says, in the age of Kali Yuga, no one should take sannyas. Those two statements, same canto, same chapter, same verse, same purport.
Really, same. Oh my God,
same purport. And I read something with this. It really helped me. Somebody asked Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, why are these apparent contradictions there in the Shastra and in the words of the Acharya? And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur replied, from the materialistic view, they may appear as contradictory. And he said, on the liberated platform, there is no contradiction. And then he said something I may never be able to wrap my head around. But he said, those are placed there, those contradictions are placed there. He said something to the effect, to protect the Shastra,
Sanctity.
to protect the sanctity of the Shastra from the prying eyes of the non-devotees, or literally the demons. So I thought, what does that mean? So it just made me realize, like, if we take those things out of context and misapply them
for our own purposes,
or to try and mold someone like we want to be, or to control them, we're missing the essence of bhakti totally. We're going off course, and we miss that understanding that this knowledge is to help me and to help others help themselves.
It was interesting, your brahmachari experience there. We were talking to one couple that we had finished mentoring, and we we end up with anyway, at the end I asked him, so how was your brahmachari training helpful or not helpful for switching to Grihastha ashram? And he said, in the beginning, the fanaticism was good. It helped me really focus, to stay brahmachari, say whatever. But there was a point later on when it needed to change. I needed actually more mature people telling me more mature ways of living my life. So at one point it was good, but I graduated on and I needed something more. And it was really hard to go into Grihastha life without that something more.
Yeah, I think that the principle, the idea of brahmachari life, that it's supposed to prepare you for Grihastha life, it makes complete sense. But actually, I think, at least in the past, a lot of times
it's the opposite.
It was the opposite. You were even while you were a brahmachari, there was no it was against the idea of becoming a grihastha. And equally, then, if you did get to the point where you did get married, you had well passed the point where you were strong, and you actually realized you needed to get married because you'd become so weak. And it actually became counterproductive in many ways. But
for sure, like the brahmachari ashram actually makes people worse grihasthas if it's not done properly. It doesn't make you. They say a good brahmachari makes a good grihastha. There's some trainings in our movement that makes you a worse grihastha.
Yeah.
So when we get them, we say, so how long have you been a brahmachari? I said, okay, so we got some deprogramming to do here.
Who's the brahmachari in England? Just took sannyas.
Sutapa was his name. Now he's Keshav Maharaj. Yeah.
He did a nice presentation. We have a men's retreat in Vrindavan. He participated one year. It was online. And he did a presentation on the brahmachari ashram. And his presentation was, everyone should have that opportunity for this immersion, at least for some time.
Yeah.
And I think that's the value of brahmachari ashram. You get the immersion.
In Krishna consciousness.
I think it's healthy to see it in that way. It's an opportunity for an immersion, but not necessarily that you're going to
Yeah.
that's going to be your life, but you just want that immersion of in that, have that strong spiritual atmosphere and that sangha for some time to help you get that taste for spiritual
Depth,
life.
maybe. Yeah. No, I would agree. And I think that, but if, for example, like we described earlier, like if the idea was that, it's an immersion and most likely, like very likely, it's a preparation for the next stage of your life. And so if it was done that way, then who knows, maybe if you are the one in a million that just, is totally suited to it and whatever, maybe you are one. I mean, like him, I mean, he's a really nice devotee and very, very,
Broad-minded too.
very broad-minded, really. Yeah, he's always kind of like, he writes, and even just the language that he uses, like he's really always looking to explain these things in the broadest way for the broadest audience. And he's kind, and I think he's a wonderful wonderful devotee.
So naturally suited to it,
Yeah, he seems like, and he's had good people around him, and I think I think it's, and it's funny because I met him when he first came, and he was such a shy kind of guy, and we never would have seen it, but he's really blossomed. But
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, so you're talking about more women should give class, and we could talk more on that. But like, even if you go back a little bit, there was a time where most of the people giving class were not just men, but then they were sannyasis. So I think it's a very human thing, whether it's right or wrong, to speak from your own perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes you may not even be aware that you're doing it. It's just how you see it. And I think there was a very strong influence of that in the past. Was
Mm-hmm.
what do you what do you think? What do you see that's being done well? Where are the good examples around, whether it's where you are or in other places where you see community being done well? What kind of things do you think are done well?
You know, we were just talking about the Brahmacharya ashram, and I was thinking about the community of Gainesville. They have the Krishna House, so there's a community of devotees there who live together, and
Yeah.
it's. I've always been very impressed by the young people I've met who've gone through it.
Mm.
And Kalakanta told me one time, when the people come to move in, he tells them, well, you can only stay a maximum, I think he says 2 years. That's the maximum. You can only stay 2 years. After that, you have to move out.
Mm.
So there's no pressure on them. It's not that, we're going to try and just manipulate this person to make them stay, and you got
Squeeze
to
a bit
stay.
more out of them.
Yeah. And he says most of them, by the time of 2 years, please can I stay a little longer?
Yeah.
And such a nice
It's a
atmosphere.
natural kind of surrender.
Yeah.
It's such a nice atmosphere, very open and broad, and really encouraging people to work within, use their own talents and abilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I see that really we need to stop micromanaging,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to give people, the scope to bring out their talents and abilities and to fan them and appreciate them.
Mm.
And in the beginning, sometimes you don't know what that is, but after a few years in Krishna consciousness, there's things that you start to gravitate towards, and to be able to appreciate people for what they do well and to encourage them to take it further. That's where I see communities where people aren't micromanaged and they're really appreciated.
Mm.
I also see communities do well where they have quite a lot of support groups. Like we were in Alachua recently, and I saw like so many ladies were part of a ladies group, and so many men had their men's groups, and they get a lot of strength and support from that.
Mm.
So I think all those things to make a good communities, we need that healthy social encouragement, appreciation, value, where we do Krishna conscious things together that aren't just, the activities that we do in the temple. Because in the morning, our sadhana is basically for ourselves. So we're kind of by ourselves looking at the deity and by ourselves, but we need some time where we sharing, all those realizations,
Mm.
where people get support. I really liked your point about mentors. I really truly see that those who have mentors that help them, people, more mature people, help to guide them, is really, really beneficial.
Mm.
Do you want to add some
I was just
things?
to say, I think communities, they need a balance of spiritual authority, a balance of organization, and a balance of independence.
Mm. Yeah. 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 What was the middle one? Spiritual authority management, was it?
Management, organization. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think those work better when they're organized. You
Yeah.
can get more.
definitely. Yeah.
We have this Kartik's coming up, and we live in a community where there's many householders,
Hmm.
and we have a building where we go to on Sundays, which are temple. We don't have a lot of temple pressures, so anyway, our focus is on building the community. So when Kartik comes, we all sign up for which night or 2 nights in the month you're going to have the Kartik program at your house.
Hmm.
So it's just the highlight. We all rush to 7:00. Whose house are we going to go to? How are they going to sing? Are they going to do it with the guitar? Are they going to have this? Or what sweets are they going to offer us after? What kind of ghee lamps are they going to have? It's just so nice. Everybody gets to do it in their own way, and it's just the highlight where we all get to go and see everybody's unique, capabilities, and how they did their little Dominar altar is going to be like totally different at every house. It's just so nice.
Last year,
I love that.
devotee from Africa heard about Dhammarastika here in Sarnagiri. He came all the way from Africa here just to spend a month to experience that.
Wow.
So it's very spiritually uplifting and very community bonding experience.
I love that, because I think that's one of the things that I was thinking about as we kind of came into this conversation was, sometimes it can seem that coming into Krishna consciousness, we need to, I'm going to use quite extreme language, like shut down or kill or like destroy like any peripheral aspects of our humanity, like to just become this kind of get rid of, like, oh, well, you like to read books,
Hare Krishna robot?
yeah, Hare Krishna robot, and actually what we're talking about here is actually embracing the full spectrum and of someone's humanity and talents and interests or whatever, and obviously bringing that into Krishna consciousness. And it's sort of a no-brainer, isn't
so much more out of that.
Yeah, and exactly, and but again, I think it's hard to control that, but like that's, I suppose, the beauty of it. Like, how is this person? But when we try to, what's the word? I don't know, like systemize or like standardize or whatever everything, then when you go to those house programs, everyone's gonna do it in the same way. They're gonna cook the same type of prashadam. Everything is gonna be the same because it's kind of like just the way everyone does it. So and actually, no one bats an eyelid at that. They almost think that to do it some other way sometimes would be wrong. And so that's just so nice what you've just shared there, because, and actually the amazing thing is then I'm sure, I think I'll speak for myself, but like you go and, it's just the way the brain works. Like when something's the same and the same and the same,
you zone out.
You zone out, and whereas when it's new, like it's alive, it's fresh, it's like, it's, it's variety, it's interesting, and it brings you in. Yeah, no, that's but again, that there has to be that context and that setting where that's not just allowed, but like appreciated and encouraged. So that's what I was kind of getting back to. It's like the things, so like even with children, for example, you can have whatever philosophy you like about this, that, and the other, but if you only praise them when they get, external results, then, that's what they're going to do, because that's what is rewarded, right? So,
appreciate them for creativity and their sincere efforts, then they flourish.
Yeah.
And you see, Prabhupada did that. All the letters, just appreciated them for a small thing. Somebody was sharing, Srila Prabhupada wrote them back, thank you so much for including the Tulsi leaves in the letter.
Yeah. I'm going to say something like really controversial, like when we have, so your community, you alluded to it, it's very much about the community. You've got a building you go to on Sundays, but I'm guessing there's no installed DDs there and all of that. Like, there's not like a whole big kind of thing, commitment around that. So what about, like, there's a part of the way the movement has grown is that we have these big temples, big installed DDs, and so much kind of regiment to kind of manage and look after that. And it's all very kind of, even though like the sweetness and that kind of simplicity of worship and bhakti can easily get lost in all of that kind of sort of hierarchy and kind of what's the word, duty, and so in a way, could you almost argue that in a way there then potentially like all of that can get in the way of our bhakti?
It can. Like, I've been to temples where they're just so worn out. There's so much to do to maintain all of that. And they don't have very good interactions between the devotees. I've also been to other temples that have beautiful deity worship where they have so many pujaris that you can hardly get in line. And so it's not a pressure on any one person. They just do it in such a nice way that people want to do it. And they do have the luxury of many devotees, so that helps also.
We visited some temples in Europe a few years ago, and we went back 2 years later. I remember one of the temples, when we went the second time, the whole atmosphere seemed like it just felt more perceivable when we went in the temple. And the temple president said he had to change the management, change of GBC, and their new GBC told him, it said, right now, don't think so much about expansion, concentrate on improving the relationships with the devotees.
Yeah.
And the temple president said, when I started doing that,
you could feel the atmosphere.
Yeah, the atmosphere changed and everything else improved. The other side improved. If you want to say the material aspect, people doing more service, and
the grounds looked better, that everything was donated to more.
But it's really based on the change of the heart. I remember I read something recently, I think it was it Niranjana Swami? He said that if you want to do something big for Prabhupada, the biggest thing you can do is make a change of your heart.
Yeah.
Because that's where everything else is going to come from.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's very true. I mean, I just want to jump backwards for a second. Like sometimes men will say like they'll be so caught up in their work and everything, and they'll be like, not necessarily giving their family time. And it's like, we not quite, like as far as we were talking earlier about violence, but they may get angry like, oh, I'm doing all of this for you, So it's kind of like, so I think sometimes as well, like, and I know you alluded to that idea that it's maybe because there's not enough people, but I think sometimes if we're too focused on, I'm not sure about this, but I'm going to say it and you can see what you think. If we're so focused on the idea that like Krishna on the altar there, the deity, is so much more important than everybody else, and in that sort of mindset we're rude to people and we're kind of like, it's kind of like it's sort of missing the point, isn't it?
Yeah. And Lord Kapila said that. He said, one may worship me in the form of the deity, but if he's envious or neglectful of others, his worship is like pouring ghee on ashes. Because how you relate with the people who come to the temple, that's a part of deity worship. It's so important. And
yes, if you ignore my kids, am I going to be happy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like it's a great imbalance of values. So Krishna is important, but the devotees are...
That's so Kanishta, though.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And the problem is that wherever you go, most of our temples are filled with Kanishtas, because as soon as somebody gets a little bit to the Madhyama platform, it's just too confining, and they find out and they go out and they make it with their own like a bit more mature flavor, and new people come in again, and we have to find some way to
bridge that gap. Yeah, because the irony of that is that when people come to the temple, they think they're encountering the best version of the thing, whereas if actually they're encountering the most Kanishta version of it,
basic,
and that's not good, is it? Yeah.
So one of the questions was, how do you see like how do you know your community is doing well? One thing I see is if you have teenagers and young people who are very enthusiastic and still coming, because you can't fake it with a teenager. They're going to catch hypocrisy. They smell any little whiff of it. So if you have an atmosphere in your temple where, when the kids get older, they're still coming, they're bringing their friends, they feel welcomed, it's enjoyable for them. It's just not rote and stereotyped. I think that's one of the lenses you can look through.
That's a good one.
Because you
Yeah.
just can't fake it.
That's important. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you see they're all gone,
Yeah. I guess you could say the same if like there's only one type of person coming, or one sort of there's not diversity or breadth of people coming and staying, I suppose.
Yeah.
So we could go on in many ways and talk about this in many different aspects, but I suppose we've talked a bit about learning to identify or be able to recognize what isn't healthy, and then talked about the importance of becoming like healing ourselves, genuinely doing the work on ourselves, like taking personal responsibility to change. We talked about examples of where things are working well. I think we talked about embracing our own humanity and the humanity of, devotees. And I think that's the interesting thing. Like one thing I'm been thinking about a lot recently, sometimes it seems like from one perspective, we could be perceived that we go backwards. But actually, if we go backwards to a more honest and true position, then actually we can make real progress from there. So actually, we're going backwards to move forwards, if you know what I mean.
To the true fundamentals, not being a fundamentalist, but
we have to all embrace our weirdness.
Yeah.
We're all very unique spirit souls. We have to develop that.
Yeah.
For Christian.
Yeah. Yeah, that's nice. Yeah. And yeah, exactly. So accepting people like for who they are, encouraging them, engaging them, not seeing everything as having to be one, like there's just only one way. Sorry, you were saying something?
I was just saying, Prabhupada said something in the spiritual world. Spiritual means variety. The spiritual world is so much variety, and we tend to want to like clone it.
Yeah. Well, clones, like if you think of the army, there is a sort of an element of cloningism because they just want maximum output, minimum distraction. I think there was a time where that was kind of like the mode, I think. And while it might be effective for a very short, unusual set of circumstances, it's definitely not. We see so many people come back from the army and not able to fit into society, committing suicide, all kinds of things. I sometimes think my brahmachari life was a little bit like that. It felt there was many, many wonderful aspects to it, but it was a bit like being in the army and going to war and kind of coming back. You kind of like it gives you character and, you learn a lot from it, but equally like it's sort of a bit traumatic.
Yeah. And actually, in the army, the general mass of the army, they're trained like clones. The special operative troops, or the Green Berets, I don't know what they call them in England, those warriors, they teach to be independent thinkers. So they don't have to wait for some command to know what to do. They're going to be able to react in any situation. And that's what Prabhupada wanted us to be, independently thoughtful.
And to be able to apply the philosophy in all circumstances. Otherwise, we just do the rote actions without knowing how to apply the spiritual understanding from our hearts into every circumstance. We're not really making spiritual advancement.
No.
Yeah.
No, we're kind of, but I think sometimes I see in communities, where if you think of it as especially when it veers into more religiosity, it kind of, it centers around, X number of festival days a year, who's doing this, who's given that. It's sort of like a weird sort of slightly weird spiritual kind of scoreboard or something, rather than, organic kind of deep spiritual life.
I just heard Prabhupada said, Krishna consciousness is not a religion. It's a process of purification of the heart.
Yeah.
And so our communities need to reflect that, heartfelt relationships between devotees. And that's what everyone's craving. Like nowadays, loneliness is an epidemic. I think this year it's the UN Surgeon General or whatever said it's the epidemic loneliness. So people come to community for that heart-to-heart connection. And we need to be able to provide it with the depth of spiritual understanding that really makes you feel connected. Because, yoga is to link. So we all have, nowadays in neuroscience, they're finding that our brains are wired to be linked to another person. And we see that we're wired to be linked to Krishna and all of Krishna's devotees. So that's really what we're all looking for when we come to spiritual life.
And that's not necessarily easy to do in a community because we are individuals and different ways of doing things. And sometimes our rough edges are going to clash. But that's also part of our spiritual life because we're praying, as Lord Chaitanya prayed, to become more tolerant than the tree and devoid of all sense of false prestige. So in community, we're given lots of opportunities to be patient and humble and tolerant.
Yeah.
And when we can do that and model how to do it for other people, we're going to learn that quicker, because that ability to connect is actually learned by seeing it in action. You don't learn it when you're all by yourself. So community is one of the best places for anartha nivritti because we can help each other. And so when it's a healthy community, it's just one of the best things that can happen in your life.
It's interesting. I think I can't remember exactly, but towards the very beginning of the conversation, I think one of you was talking about finding, people, even if it's smaller groups of people that you can come together with, because I think sometimes we feel like maybe more in the beginning, like we're joining, the movement. So we're supposed to kind of like be part of the whole community and kind of like, whereas actually, I think part of maturity is also to understand that you may not, like it's a matter of survival. You've got to find the groups of people that you can feel comfortable with and are, nourished by, and it may not be everybody. And I think it's important, to find people that can accept you as you are, because I think sometimes I've experienced where it's like I'm part of this community, but it's very conditional. So like if I don't agree with a particular thing or whatever, then the price of me saying that will mean that I will become excluded
Exclusion.
from the community, and therefore I might, me or someone might stay, contrary to all of the things they really feel, because community is obviously a thing that everyone seeks. Do you know what I mean? So it's kind of like that's
So you're saying you got to find your community within your community.
yeah.
And I see that where you can flourish and you're appreciated and valued and acknowledged, and where your community values the other communities. So you don't become like a groupist and
Separatist,
elitist
yeah.
and cliquey and a separatist, but how you can contribute to the greater community with your strong sangha.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. And we also talked about needing to broaden out the and so I guess anyone listening, like part of this is also having the courage to seek out. So like if you go to the shop and there's only 5 things on sale, like okay, it'd be great if the shopkeeper stocks more stuff on offer, but equally you could um, ask them for other things to be stocked, or you could seek out other
Go
things.
elsewhere.
Yeah, like like I think that's important. That like, I mean, I'll say it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts. Like almost whether you're a young devotee or you're whatever stage of devotee you're at, to almost don't feel like if you're not if what you're looking for is not like kind of on offer from the designated people, like don't feel shy to like try and find that association wherever you can find it.
Or to try to offer it to your community.
Yeah, if
Find
you
a way
can.
to offer it.
Yeah,
Also, yeah,
yeah,
you
definitely.
can.
Yeah. Okay, well that's wonderful. I think I think that hopefully there was quite a lot of stuff there that will be useful, I hope, to people listening. Do you want to finish up on because we touched on it briefly, that the need to have obviously more diverse voices, but especially more women. I think I'll just say one thing, and then I'll open it up to you. But like sometimes I think the the dichotomy is all anchored around whether women can be gurus or whether women can give Bhagavatam class. I think that's like a distraction into these weird like specific things. I think actually it's a much more broad thing of like whether we can start to value and appreciate and want to hear more perspectives from women, and then all of those other things will just naturally come. Do you know what I mean? I think we can put it all on as if it all hinges on this one kind of artificial like circumstance.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas actually, like, you know, if we just like we're like, of course we just want to hear from everybody and anyone who has anything valuable to offer. So like, what are your thoughts on how maybe one or two things we can do to like just to be more open to that, more kind of appreciative of wanting to understand things from a female perspective?
I think that one thing that might help is, for us men to maybe ask ourselves, if we have this apprehension about hearing from women, why? Does it make us feel insecure? Does it make us feel inadequate? Maybe we need to examine that. Why should we feel insecure about that? Is that a threat to controlled?
Yeah. Yeah. Did you want to say something as well?
Well, I'm actually seeing, as time progresses, many of the women are developing a lot of skills and a lot of qualities, and naturally they're moving into positions and they're, quite good at what they do. I'm also seeing that sometimes there's also a shortage of mature men to head things up. And so, how to also encourage that?
Yeah.
Because, if you got a lot of daughters, you're trying to find a good guy, responsible and everything.
Yeah.
You see that the girls are really well trained and the guys aren't as well trained. So I don't think it's just the women. I think, though, that when the men that do lead encourage the women, and then the women encourage the men, you'll end up moving up. But otherwise, it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
So I think it has to go both ways. It's just that if you're stifled so that you can't offer that appreciation and encouragement and, leadership and ideas, then everything's going to flounder.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, when I, having what had happened during making the documentary, but it's also gone on into many other conversations since. Part of making it was like realizing that it has become in the broader society very sort of popular or I don't know what the right word is, but to empower young women, and if you do that and in isolation without understanding the holistic picture and the community and the family and the men and all the rest of it, then it's a kind of a sort of a naive kind of endeavor, because whenever you change one thing, like it'll affect something else, and we have to kind of all want to flourish together.
Empower everyone.
And so you're absolutely right, like with in the world more broadly, and I think it's true, sometimes you see the responses, at least unfortunately. Another thing that's difficult is when for me, if I want to get a litmus test on the movement or whatever, sometimes I'm not really seeing the full movement. I'm just seeing the bits of it that I can see online, or the bits of it like that, the people who are vocal or who are saying stuff online. And sometimes like they're just, depressing hearing the way people will respond, into things like the change, in the let's say the upliftment of women's voices and so on. So, but I do think that it's an important point, because men, as it's one of the last lines in my documentary, as this shift happens globally, where people are questioning maybe a certain application of patriarchal thinking, or you know, and women's voices are becoming more prominent. For a lot of men, that is really difficult. And you know, like you said at the beginning, like it might be a spectrum. You know, some of them, it's too easy, I think, to just sort of say, oh, they just can't handle it and all that. I think many of them are very well, you know, trying their best, but they're now kind of confused as to like what's their kind of like. Before it was really clear for them like what they were supposed to do, and now they don't really know. And unfortunately, when that gets,
They meaning men?
say again, sorry.
They meaning men?
Sorry, yeah, they meaning men, yeah, yeah. And then I think if they don't find their feet with that, or kind of like grow as well and like adapt and feel like they're have some clarity, or at least, you know, some way forward with it all, they can get confused, sometimes disempowered, and even, you know, in the worst, you know, violent and so on. So I do think it's really important, yeah, to kind of, it's not like, oh, men are fine and women, we just have to help them, and like men will just be fine. Like, no, you know, it's kind of like looking out for everyone. There's something else I was thinking of as well. Yeah, one last thing. I just wonder if you would share a few thoughts. Sometimes my experience is that if you bring in, let's say, women's voices, again, sometimes we may go, oh, it's great. There's now, or any minority, you know, oh, we've got like some people who are from that group that don't really speaking. But actually, I think sometimes there's like a sort of a Stockholm syndrome, or a kind of a patriarchal supporter type voice that can come even from women. So like, in other words, it might be a woman who's speaking, but actually they're just kind of echoing the same system, you know.
They've got the same patriarchal voice.
There's no
Patriarchy
actual
isn't just for
new
men.
perspective, you know.
Women can be patriarchal to other women. We're patriarchal towards the environment. One country's patriarchal over another. It's just the lord it over.
Yeah.
Material world syndrome.
So how do we,
and yes,
yeah, sorry, go on.
We do get stuck up in it. So how to get rid of it?
Well, how do we encourage, like, almost, like, I suppose I'll try and say it, you know, how do we, like we were saying earlier, how do we encourage, or not empower, but like give people the courage to be themselves in Krishna consciousness, and equally for women, when they speak up, to truly be themselves, and not just say what they think they're supposed to say, like, you know, to also be like present as their full selves.
I'm just flashing on something a book we read recently, and the gist of it is it's actually about us. It's not me versus you, men versus women, but it's actually about us as spirit souls, as
how relational,
how we're going to be relational, so that it's for everyone's welfare. If we, I just keep thinking, if we could put our focus on it's us, and what's the welfare for all of us, and it's going to be individual for everyone, but
in all our interactions, we have to think not about me, not even particularly about them, but how are we going to function well together? And that's what we have to work out, and that's what community is all about. And we do only learn that in community. It's just we have to focus on the relational aspect of community, not the managerial aspects of, you know, achievements.
And my welfare can't be based upon suppressing someone else and their ability to develop their full potential.
I mean, I hear you. Can I just offer something? As you were speaking there, and you were saying we need to behave in a way that is better for everyone. Well, someone could go, exactly, that's why you've got the perfect Vedic template. You're a woman, you should behave like this. You should have your head covered. You shouldn't speak. This is the perfect system. That's going to be best for all of us. You know what I mean? um, and um, and
It's going to
so
be better for him.
we've given
That's it.
you the perfect formula. Just follow it. So, and unfortunately, I think a lot of people love that.
But
Like,
that's not relational.
it's not,
That's
no.
all about me. No, we're not relational.
Mm.
And we don't understand that that's our whole way we're wired, is to relate, to be able to relate with Krishna and to be able to relate with each other.
And the Yagnik Brahmins, they had it their yagnas down perfectly, but they realized we just screwed up big time.
We missed the boat.
We missed the boat.
Mm.
We all come to community because we need friends and we need someone to relate with, and that's how we develop our relationship with Krishna, by serving each other and happily, together serving Krishna. That's what we want community for.
What would be your advice to someone who is afraid to be themselves, who feels that if they don't fit the cookie cutter thing that I just said, that they won't be accepted?
Got to find some mentors that accept you.
Mm.
And I think that as people, if we are in community, we need to be reaching out and, trying to help those people who are a little bit shy or scared, or because that's a conditioning that they brought with us from however they were brought up also.
Mm.
And so we have to help them with that.
Sometimes I tell devotees, thanks for being you. No one else would take the job. You're very unique, wonderful individual with amazing qualities that Krishna's giving you. You just have to develop them.
Mm. And I guess because I was just thinking, I know I used the word scared there, but like I think sometimes even people who are not normally scared people at all, because if the predominating culture is powerful, they will still feel like it's kind of like ultimately it's the fear of not being accepted is the thing. So even like they'll suppress so many things because being accepted, like I think as you said, loneliness is there. Like to be in any kind of a community is like so valuable. So.
Mm-hmm.
I guess back to our early points, I think if each of us
You
are...
got to look for the pockets that hear what you're saying and try to make a little bit of change in the small ways, and then have it, work up.
Mm.
And I think that if you can't say anything, but you still realize it's wrong, and you can pray for them, and you can support the victim, then gradually it will all change.
Yeah.
Because it's true. Sometimes it's not safe even to, rock the boat.
Yeah.
However, the challenge is to not switch your way of thinking to that.
Yeah.
That's the hard part.
Yeah.
And that's what, somebody won a Nobel Peace Prize because he says war changes the way that you think about other people.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we're seeing that in the world at the moment. There's some crazy stuff.
Because discrimination is taught. So that if it's taught, it means it can be unlearned.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. I was thinking the same, like, as it's something you each said at the beginning, like if we, and I think I remembered, I was trying to remember it earlier. You talked earlier about your sphere of influence. I think that's what I was kind of trying to come back to, that like it's easy sometimes to feel dismayed or, concerned or whatever about the state of things. But I interviewed someone recently on my podcast who talks about the media and the news and everything. And they're saying the news talks a lot of negative things. It creates a lot of urgency around negativity, but it doesn't give you agency. And then when you don't have agency, then you feel like really awful. And so I really appreciate that earlier point. And like, I think it's back to the thing of finding, even if it's a small group of people, you've got to, and I think I fall into it. And I think I'm taking it personally. Like, I can see as many things as I like. It doesn't really matter how many things I can see that are not whatever. But actually, if I can take some small or whatever bigger actions to change it in my small sphere of influence, then I won't feel hopeless, right? Because I can make progress.
For sure. And slowly your influence will grow.
Yeah.
But you're wasting your time when you're dealing with the stuff that you don't have any influence over.
Yeah, that's very
You get really frustrated.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. Well, thank you both so much. It's nice to see you. I hope we did this last year. Maybe we'll do it again next year.
Yeah, looking forward to next year already.
And yeah, I've. Are you at Sharanagati? In is that what
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I visited many years ago, but maybe we'll get to come again. It was a nice place.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. As one of my friends said, though, I was going to take Vanapros, but the forest got burnt. We had a huge fire, so Saranaga is very different. We're in a little green pocket, but just a little down the road is charred,
Oh,
burnt.
really? Wow.
Yeah.
Gosh.
It's been tough.
Yeah. So thank you both so much.
Anyway.
I hope everyone listening that there was something useful there. I think there'll be many things and if you do, wherever this is shared, if you find something useful, maybe you can share it in the comments. And it's nice to always, like, it's great to do these conversations, but it's also nice to hear kind of how people are, what they're thinking, and if they have questions and all the rest of it. So please do
What they can add. Yeah.
engage with it. Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama